I think that's the problem, that fame concentrates, whereas actually brilliance is actually kind of fractal. You can find it kind of everywhere. You know, wherever you go, if you dig a little bit deeper, there's something extraordinary.
Welcome to the Quest for Questions podcast. Today's guest is a luminary in the world of advertising and an unrelenting advocate for behavior economics. He's a marketing maven who's devoted his entire career to challenging conventional wisdom and exploring the hidden side of everything. Rory Sutherland has spent over 30 years at Ogilvy, a prestigious advertising, marketing, and PR agency, when he is currently a vice chairman. He is the mind behind the book Alchemy, the surprising power of ideas that don't make sense, that takes a deep dive into the counterintuitive art of persuasion and the power of non-logic. Rory is also someone that if you give him an intriguing problem and a pint of a fine British ale, he might just uncover the hidden psychological forces that are influencing your business and your customers. The three main questions me and Rory are exploring in the first part of the interview are: why fame tends to concentrate while magnificence displays a fractal nature, and what are the implications of this pattern for our society? What exactly is the Satisficer's way of travel, and how it can change the way we explore the world? And finally, how can one effectively promote a country taking its unique attribute into account when attracting more tourism? And can we learn anything from David Ogilvy's approach to advertising for the English Tourist Board in the United States? This is Conrad, yerba mate addict, and here's a conversation with the author of Alchemy, the maverick marketer, and the one and only Rory Sutherland. Enjoy.
So one thing that's worth doing is, I mean, I'm fascinated by that. Funnily enough, David Ogilvy was fascinated by it as well, because he did a lot of advertising for the English Tourist Board in the United States. Being an Englishman in New York, he was perfectly placed to encourage Americans to go to England back in the sort of late 50s, early 60s. I think pretty sure that was the time. And he obviously sold Britain very largely on sort of heritage and history, which made a lot of sense, particularly to an American audience. And, you know, we can't really sell the country on the weather. But there's a fundamental problem to be solved in world tourism, which is there isn't really a problem with over-tourism. There's a problem with over-concentration of tourists. And so you have this winner-takes-all effect. Now, for example, I think of tourist nights spent in the UK, something like hotel nights from overseas people, something like 85% are spent in London. And then you get places which suffer disproportionately. There are two things that can be bad for a tourist site, one of which is cruise ships, where you get the people, but you don't really get the money, because they're staying on a cruise ship, they're eating on a cruise ship, and they're just coming ashore to wander around the place and maybe buy a couple of souvenirs. And another one is, of course, day trippers. So you have this issue, Oxford, Stratford-upon-Avon, some of the major sort of British tourist towns are a easy day trip from London. So nobody bothers to actually up sticks and stay in Oxford or stay in Stratford-on-Avon. What they do is they basically take a trip from London by train or by coach. And then, by the way, they visit the 6 Oxford colleges which are featured in the Harry Potter films. And those 6 colleges in Oxford that happen to feature in a Harry Potter film get something like 5 times the visitors of the colleges that don't, regardless of kind of architectural merit. And so you have this fame problem, which is everybody wants to do something that other people have heard of.
Yeah.
I'm guilty of this.
Yeah.
I'm guilty of this. A few years ago, about 10 years ago, I had a business meeting just outside Pisa. And we were just about to head back to the airport the next day, planning to travel back to the airport. And somebody said, "Do you actually see the Leaning Tower of Pisa?" No, neither did I. Are we going to look bloody stupid if our children go, "Have you ever been to Pisa, Dad?" Yes. What do you think of the Leaning Tower? I didn't see it. So we had to book a taxi and go and spend 2 hours standing up, pretending to hold up. Because, so this question of kind of memetics and social copying, and also the fact that you score more highly going to places that other people respect. Okay.
Bucket lists, right? All that
So
stuff.
there's a feedback loop. Now, in truth, in a sensible world, okay, 70% as many people will go to, say, Trieste as go to Venice. But what you'll probably find is that, Trieste has tourist visitors that are 8% of Venice's tourist numbers, even though, it might be probably not as good, but it's possibly 10% less good, but 98% less famous.
Yeah.
You get this absurdity. There's a British seaside town called Salcombe, which is a very, very nice town. Okay. And it somehow has acquired the reputation as kind of the best town in Devon. And so property
Hello to
prices,
your
I
wife?
think,
Is it your wife?
that's my wife's just wandering in. The average property price in Salcombe is £1 million. You have another problem, which is that rich people aren't actually very imaginative. They want to go where other rich people are and hang out with them. So you get this absurd concentration of kind of very wealthy people in about sort of 9 locations worldwide. It's kind of, it tends to be London, Miami Beach, Dubai, etc. And by the way, I think Dubai may be the world's top tourist destination in another 7 years' time. So you can break into this kind of exclusive club because Dubai was nowhere, 25 years ago or 30 years ago, but it takes a long time to break into that club, and a hell of a lot of marketing and a hell of a lot of building and a hell of a lot of brand building and a hell of a lot of publicity. I did think of trying to counter the problem by writing a Satisficer's travel guide, which was a guide to places that aren't necessarily the best place you can go to, but are the most underrated. So, what is the most underrated? And just as an example, okay, everybody's heard of it. I would argue if you go to North America, Chicago is in some respects the best city in the United States. Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah.
A lot of Polish people.
And of course, it's huge Polish community. Absolutely right.
Is it famous in Poland? You say that the second biggest city in Poland of Poland is Chicago.
It's Warsaw, then Chicago. Yeah, that's a big Ukrainian population as well. Yeah. And very interesting. So I did think of actually writing a kind of what you might call not the bucket list, but the Satisficer's guide. In other words, what are the second and third best places which are woefully underrated? The third best art gallery, the second best, because fame is not proportionate to quality. And so when people's tourist choices are driven by fame, now I don't know, I'm going to ask this question, okay? So you're in Argentina. Have you got plans to visit or have you visited the Iguazu Falls?
In my other trip, but because I was like hitchhiking across the whole country. But yeah, I'm exactly, we are talking about this. We need to collaborate because I'm exactly now trying to solve this problem here in Argentina because, I know the language, I want to live here. And then I saw, like, from my observation, what people ask in the Facebook groups, like talking to tourists, basically like the tourism in this great, crazy big country of Argentina is so concentrated in basically 3 areas. So one is Patagonia, so like the south,
Yes.
like the glacier, seeing penguins or,
Welsh people and cakes.
And then you have Mendoza, so the wine.
Yes.
People go to the bodegas, to the wineries. And then the third one is, Iguazu and Buenos Aires because everyone lands in Buenos Aires.
Of course.
But there's a vast, really great province. Like lived now 6 months in Cordoba, which is, I never heard anything about Cordoba before coming to Argentina. Like no one talks about it. In Argentina, it's more popular, like the local tourism. And it has its own mountains, but they're smaller and it's absolutely spectacular. Like the towns, it's half as cheap as the south, The people are more open because they're less used to tourists. So as you're saying, basically, it's sort of like maybe the second best in terms of like, if you look at it purely logically, it's not a glacier, but in many ways, it's better, like your experience,
Well, for example, if you're a Brit in New York, no one gives a shit, right? Okay. But if you're a Brit in kind of, New Orleans or somewhere, they make a bit of a fuss of you because there's a small amount of novelty. And similarly, smaller cities are often a lot more manageable than bigger cities.
Yes, exactly.
So,
They are the best.
so actually, Rome, I would recommend to everybody that they go to Rome because as a city, it's magnificent. But then there are places like Lucca, for example, which are pretty fantastic and kind of walkable. And there's the interesting kind of tourist guide, which is where the locals go. Because every single tourist to Spain, not every single one, but you famously have the Costa Blanca and you have the Costa del Sol, right? But in fact, the native Spaniards who live in the south go to the Costa de la Luz, which is effectively west, as you near the Portuguese border. Now it's windy, there is a caveat there. It can be pretty windy, but on the other hand, it's got a wild coastline which isn't completely surrounded by, Northern European. And in fact, Spaniards tend to have second homes on the Atlantic coast of Portugal now, if they live towards the west, rather than going to their own coast. So now, it's really, really critical, which is the kind of, I guess it's the Porto versus Lisbon challenge. But that's, Porto is actually pretty big, so actually it probably does quite well touristically. But you get this appalling kind of winner takes all, and then the consequence of that is it's problematic, okay? And it's particularly problematic if you get cultures like Japanese culture or American culture, where they only get 2 weeks vacation.
Yeah, because it's also a question of time, right? Like the compression of you want to do everything.
That's means that, and I've got to be sympathetic about this, okay? When I first took my kids to Paris, we kind of had to look at the Mona Lisa and go and see the Eiffel Tower, okay? Now, if you're only going to go to a place once, okay? Now, I've lived in London, okay, or in and around London since 1988, okay? I've never been to Buckingham Palace. I've never been to the Tower of London. I've never seen the crown jewels. Okay, I haven't done any of that shit. And the reason is when I go tomorrow, right? If I felt this is the only time in my life I'm going to go to London, okay, well, I'm going to see Big Ben and I'm going to see Tower Bridge anyway. But I feel an absolute collapse if I don't go and see those. London probably has 10 of them actually.
So you become a maximizer, right? In your terms, like you are even...
Also, it's a kind of FOMO thing. It was my problem
FOMO.
with Pisa, which is, I now you kind of, if you go to Rome, you kind of have to do the Colosseum, and so on. And it is, there's a very strange form of tourism, by the way, which is, in other words, what happens if your country people only go to once? They're not going to do the more interesting form of tourism. So I had a very interesting, by the way, if you ever go to Loch Ness, okay, about 85% of the tourists, it's famous in large parts of the world for the Loch Ness Monster, which is a sort of fictitious creature, okay? Now, when you go there, about 85% of the tourists appear to be Japanese or Korean. And the reason is, if you're Japanese or Korean, the Loch Ness Monster is like insanely famous in Japanese kind of folklore. And now the problem there is that there are lots of lochs in Scotland, which are very, very beautiful, okay? They've only heard of Loch Ness, but also, because of that 2 weeks holiday thing, they know they're only ever going to go to Scotland once in their life. And I had a friend at Ogilvy who worked for a time in Norway on the Norwegian tourist board, where Norway gets a lot of Japanese tourists. I said, I was in direct marketing at the time, and well, that's quite niche, right? A Japanese person going to Norway. I did ask, is it the shared interest in whaling? And he said, no, it's nothing to do with that. I said, have you thought of doing a loyalty program to come back? And he said, there is absolutely no point in a loyalty program. Because the reason Japanese go to Norway is they want to see a fjord, okay? Because whatever reason, the Japanese know about fjords. And they will go and they will see a fjord, and while they're there, they'll probably see 2 or 3 more fjords, and they will put a big tick in the fjord box, and they will never come back to Norway ever again, and they won't go and see the cathedral in wherever it's called. There's the astounding cathedral in Norway, absolutely magnificent, which no one's fucking heard of, by the way. In fact, I had to Google it. Okay, that's the example of how shit things are in terms of human perception, the winner takes all effect. I just remembered it now. I think it's called Nidaros. I'm pretty sure I'm right. Here we go. Biggest cathedral in Norway, Nidaros. Yeah, I was right. So it's actually technically called the Nidarosdomen. And it's absolutely sodding magnificent, but no one's bloody heard of it. I mean, seriously. I mean, I hadn't heard of it until 5 years ago when I went on a kind of drunken Wikipedia bit.
Go ahead.
YouTube has a real role to play here in basically encouraging what you might call the alternative tourism goal. But the problem is that, as you said, everybody flies into Buenos Aires anyway. So they're going to, you'd be silly not to spend a few days there, certainly, if not a week. And then you're going to have a look at Iguazu and you're going to see the winery and you're going to get a Patagonia. Okay.
So I think it's a bad business idea to go into it, like trying for me, because I always traveled that way. I always went like the opposite of where you talk about. Yes. You are the bee that ignores the wiggleness. So I always did that in my life in many things, but in travel especially. And I always listen to the locals, and it often led me to, I would say, better experience, more interesting, but like far from the tourist track. And I'm trying to use this like more kind of propensity for it and the fact that I see opportunity in Argentina. But I'm wondering if you think it's like sort of like a lost act as far as trying to make money out of it, like trying to promote places that are not already popular in some way that they
do. What you could do, and now obviously, one of the things I did suggest when I spoke to the Dubai Tourist Authority is I said, in a sense, you've got a city break and a beach holiday and winter sun all in one. So what you could do, and of course, unsurprisingly, the people in Dubai are pretty damn astute, and they'd already thought of it 5 years ago. They're creating a kind of beach resort not that far from Dubai, from the people who don't want to go shopping for 7 days, but want 2 days of shopping, a day of sightseeing, and then 5 days on the beach. You can also find out, when I went to Bermuda, it struck me that everybody who flies across the Atlantic, on a business trip, could break their flight home. And instead of flying back New York, London, they could go New York, Bermuda, London.
Stop over like Iceland.
There's that kind of thing. And so there are places which are just very luckily located where they might be able to play that game. And the other thing Argentina could do is create a brand around a kind of beach resort. Because it's winter sun, you're in the southern hemisphere. There are lots of reasons. There's not a huge time zone difference between the UK, okay? So you don't get the shitty bloody jet lag you get if you go to Australia, okay?
Yeah.
I mean, I went to Australia with my family. I thought Sydney was utterly fantastically magnificent. But for the first 5 days we were there, we didn't get up until noon, okay? Which is a bit of a waste,
Which is like all Argentinians here in their normal life. We have siesta.
And you wouldn't be missing out much, would you? No. Now, there's a compatriot of yours, a Polish woman who's a YouTuber who travels around in a Land Rover motor caravan. Have you seen her? She's
again?
And I can't remember her name. She's a very brilliant YouTuber.
Like a woman that's a Polish woman that's traveling in a van, in a Land Rover across the world?
This must be her. Hello. Yeah, she's called Ava. Hold on. Ava, is it Ava Zubek? Does that make sense? Yeah, I think she's Ava Zubek. I don't sound German, but I think she's Polish.
Yeah, there are different, surnames with the
war.
wars.
She goes everywhere. And it's fascinating that motorhoming actually is one interesting thing, because it does tend to actually cause people to go to slightly weirder places. But again, you need a bloody big time frame in which to do it properly. And she goes to for example, there's some place, I think in Nevada, which is the most remote town in the United States with a population of, I don't know, 106 people. And effectively it's like 6 hours drive to get to the nearest town or whatever crazy thing it is. But I mean, it's really, really fascinating because it's an entirely different. And so the motoring holiday is great in a sense. And that's where the US scores really well, because a hell of a lot of people do fly drive. And the great thing about fly drive is it does disperse people. Because some of the best moments I've had in the
What's
United
fly drive?
States, fly drive where you fly or hire a car. It's a fly drive holiday, almost. I mean, obviously, people do it in France to an extent. Europeans will do it where they fly somewhere, Italy. They fly, they pick up a rental car. But the American fly drive holiday is particularly good in a way because it disperses people. Actually, some of the best discoveries I made in the United States, Santa Fe, New Mexico, for example, not that it's unknown, but I mean, most Brits haven't heard of it. Tucson, Bisbee, Arizona. A lot of those places were basically accidental discoveries where we were just driving somewhere and thought, well, let's deviate for an hour and go and look at this place. And sometimes the place is crap and sometimes the place is brilliant, those for Montana. They're extraordinary places all over the US, which most foreign visitors don't really get to see because then they don't want an additional flight. And then you also get a very, very clever bit of branding. And I need to get the name right here because one of the most ingenious ways of dispersing tourists is the North is branding a road. Okay.
What? Say again? Branding
a road. So there are two brilliant cases. There are more. I mean, there are other roads that are kind of branded in the way that American railways. You had the 21st Century Limited and what was it? The East Coast Starliner and the Pan American historically. You branded a railway route. Now, 66 is obviously the world's most famous road. Okay.
Or here, there's Ruta 40 in Argentina, the famous Pan American that goes all across.
Interesting.
So there is a famous, a lot of tourists.
Road is that you enrich a ribbon. Now, someone in Scotland, I don't know who this was a complete genius because everybody knew that the drive, roughly speaking, from Inverness round the north of Scotland, down the west coast and back again was actually sensationally magnificent in terms of the scenery and the natural beauties, and the food's pretty good as well. Okay. And some genius decided to call it the North Coast 500. And so they took a road, which was just actually a concatenation of various roads called the A9 and the A this and the B that, and they forged it into a circuit, and they effectively created a brand and a name for something that didn't have a name before. Previously, you'd say, well, my friends and I think you're doing a long, circuitous drive around the north of Scotland. And you go, fine, yeah, okay, great. Yeah. But now suddenly people were saying, I've got 3 mates and we're going to do the North Coast 500. What's that? Okay. And that was a piece of complete genius, I think, in terms of touristic branding. So what you're talking about is a fundamental problem. Now, one lucky thing is, I'm older. Okay, I'm 57. B, thanks to business travel, I've been to quite a lot of famous places. There aren't that many places. Probably if Argentina would be one of them. There are only about 5 places that are a real bucket list. I mean, New Zealand, I guess Argentina would be another one. I think very good gig, or Brazil, or both.
You haven't been to Argentina?
I've been to Mexico. That's all. That's the only place I've been in.
I invite you, Rory. If you come here, I can take you around.
Well, here's the thing. I'm actually, one of the interesting things is that when you get a bit older, in a way, what you realize is that if you're curious, there's interest to be found everywhere.
Yeah.
Actually, some of the most interesting evenings I've spent, the most memorable evenings I've spent with my wife and with my children are in, the ones you sort of remember are really odd. Okay. I mean, I've been to the Platinum and I remember that. Of course, the Platinum is actually magnificent. Okay. I also remember, the what's it called? The, Scottsdale Botanical Gardens, which is a huge collection of cactus and succulents, or Taliesin West in Phoenix, which is Frank Lloyd Wright's kind of built architecture school. And there are places like that. And actually, all you've got to do is have a bit of a shufti, and you discover that actually magnificence, fame is concentrated, magnificence is fractal. Now, I'll give you two examples of this. The museum, if you're ever in Cardiff, the collection of kind of French impressionist art there is absolutely magnificent. You wouldn't expect it. There's two very wealthy Welsh women who are the only people in Britain who really cottoned on to this artistic movement. They were rich, and they were the only people who really cottoned on when you could really afford to buy it in quantity. And so it's sensational. Okay. Where I live in Kent, 12 miles away, there's a church in a place called Chudley. Okay. It's a little English parish church because of an extraordinary incident where someone's child died in a boating accident. Their daughter died in a boating accident. The father was Jewish. The mother was Anglican. The mother, I think, had been to a Chagall exhibition with her daughter shortly before she died. And they decided to commemorate their daughter by getting Chagall to replace the plain window at the end of this English parish church. And Chagall came over from Reims, where he was actually doing some stained glass window work at Reims Cathedral. And he liked the project so much that he offered to do every single window in the church. And so you have this English parish church in Chudley in Kent, which now literally I had lived 20 miles away from that, okay, for 10 years before I'd heard about it. And, you know, on any trip to England, I would argue, if you added that to your repertoire, maybe on the way to Canterbury Cathedral or something like that, there's a fair chance it might be the most memorable moment of your trip to the UK. Because it's just extraordinary and it's unknown, and you can tell all your friends about it. You can't really say, there's this really big clock in London, you wouldn't believe it, right? I mean, people know that shit, right? But actually, I think that's the problem, that fame concentrates, whereas actually brilliance is actually kind of fractal. You can find it kind of everywhere, you know. Wherever you go, if you dig a little bit deeper, there's something extraordinary.
I mean, there is, do you know this? Really, I love this quote. I actually now I'm writing this kind of guide. You were talking about this. What was the guide you were saying? Like the Satisficer.
The Satisficer's guide to the second best. You could call it, you know, the agoraphobia, you know, the claustrophobic tourist guide to the second best the world has to offer. And you know, you could even apply that with things like hotels. Okay. Because you often get places where there's one really, really famous hotel, okay? You know, the Hyatt, is it the Hyatt in Tokyo? Okay. Well, I'm sure the Hyatt in Tokyo is absolutely fantastic, but I bet there's another hotel. My wife and I stayed in this hotel, and with my children actually, this hotel, Radda in Chianti, in Chianti in Italy, and it's called the Hotel the Rele Vignale, okay? And it's a bit of an eccentric place. And because it's a bit of an eccentric place, it's got a few assholes leaving negative reviews on TripAdvisor because they just didn't get it. Okay. They said, oh, the furniture's a bit old. Well, the bloody antique furniture's a fucking Italian, right? It's a fucking Italian manor house, right? Do you want to have like Danish minimalism, crying out loud, right? You know, the point was that this hotel was literally a third the price of a neighboring hotel, which was like 10% blingier, you know. And actually, there's also a huge, huge financial saving to be made in tourism by doing two things, which is going to places other people don't go at times of the year that other people don't travel there. Okay? Exactly. If you actually combine those two, it's a double whammy. And that's the way to get in the system, you know.
But what I wanted to read you the quote, coming back to what you're talking about, the sort of like that the brilliance can be found everywhere and that you don't like feel like traveling so much. There's this quote I love from Marcel Proust. I don't know if you heard about him. He said that the only true voyage of discovery, the only fountain of eternal youth would be not to visit strange lands, but to possess other eyes, to behold the universe through the eyes of another, of 100 others, to behold the 100 universes that each of them beholds, that each of them is.
The other approach that would be interesting is the dice man approach, where you literally build randomness into your holiday. But one of the things I always advise people to do, okay, is there's a strong tendency for people, particularly people who are really deprived of vacation time, like North Americans and the Japanese, less so sort of Germans and Europeans, where you
Overplan, no?
actually plan out every
Overplan.
single
Yeah.
fucking day, right? Now, and the second thing you do, now my friend Paul Craven, who's a brilliant behavioral scientist who lives just down the road from here, he warned his children. They were going to Latin America and they had this sort of itinerary, which is, and then we're going to Argentina, then we're going to go to Bogota, and then we're going to go to Lima, and then we're going to go to Machu Picchu, and then we're going to see the fucking Iguazu Falls, right? And actually, I think one of them got ill and the whole thing was and he said, you're making a total mistake here. What you need is 3 or 4 fixed points on your itinerary and leave the rest random. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, my wife and I went on a kind of drive. What was it? Yeah, that's right. We were driving through Arizona and we didn't know where we were going. And we happened to stumble on a brilliant and insanely cheap hotel in Tucson. Okay. And we said, well, let's stay here for 3. We're planning to stay 1 night. Let's stay here for 3. This place is great. Now, if you don't have that optionality built in, actually, your holiday won't be a voyage of discovery. It will just be a box ticking exercise.
From your friend Nassim Taleb, which I really like, which is the idea of optimizing for optionality.
Absolutely right.
And I think in travel it applies, but I think when we connect it to like just broader principles of like, you know, your general thinking of like marketing, perception hacking, which I like to call it, is the idea of the fact that on the one hand, you want serendipity, which is like, I love this word, the serendipity is from the tale of some Indians. But on the other hand, when we are talking about that most people have like 2-3 weeks, they have very low margin for error when I was thinking, and applies here, that that's why they go where everyone goes, I think, because you don't want to like end up somewhere and like 2 days are lost, because it's like your only opportunity maybe in life to go to Argentina. So if you go where everyone goes, like the chances that you're gonna like, you know, fuck up in a way are much smaller.
Absolutely true. And also, you're absolutely so optimizing for optionality is one of the most important ideas, I think. Now, I've got another friend. Now, admittedly, he's ex-Goldman Sachs as well, but he actually is kind of retired. And he makes a principle when he goes anywhere of not booking a return flight. And his point is, you know, this is kind of mood dependent. You know, I may decide I want to stay there for a month. I may decide I'm bored after a week. I may decide to go somewhere completely different and fly back from a different airport. I don't want that kind of, you know, line in the sand effectively written over my return journey. Do you have a car in Argentina?
No, I'm for now just...
One bit of advice is hire a car, okay? Now, I'm gonna be very unfashionable here, but I'm gonna launch a paean to effectively private transport. And the reason is that public mass transit operates on a hub and spoke system, and it works to concentrate people in places which are already crowded. Okay. The magnificent thing with the car, I have a friend, an American friend, who sort of motorcycled around the United States. And the best place he ever went to was a back road. There's a back road basically between, I think, El Paso and Albuquerque. And on that back road, there's a kind of weird hippie colony called Madrid. It's Madrid, but they call it Madrid, New Mexico, which is full of kind of wind chimes alternative. And he always said, of all the places I went to in the United States, that's the place I want to go to, you know. And it's on a back road. There's no airport. There's no railway station, nothing. Okay. And the car or the RV or the motorcycle or the independent mode of transportation, I think, is actually, you know, cruise ships, you know, all dock in the same fucking enormous ports. That is one reason to go on one of those blinged up luxury boutique cruises with only 100 cabins, which is they can actually go into ports which can't accommodate a just guest cruise ship, you know. And so mass transit concentrates, whereas the car or the motorbike or the van, they dissipate.
No, it's true. I went on bicycle from all across Central America, from Mexico to Colombia. And it was like the best thing I've done, because we went through, you know, when you even go by car, you oftentimes like miss the Because the idea, I think it's connected to our logical world. If we connect all the principles of like, it's about going from A to B, and it's about the A and B point. It's about not about the journey. It's about the points. And when you go even by car, even if it's yours, most of the time you focus on the points. You don't really stop in some small village in the middle of nowhere. On a bicycle, for example, you are sort of forced because you go so slow. You go through every possible town, like that's imaginable. So you are more like prone to stumble upon some secrets, like crazy.
Another tip is if you rent an electric car, charging points are in weird places. Okay. So quite often the need to charge your car will serendipitously take you to a place where you would otherwise not stop for 40 minutes. And so we had this stop in Italy and we discovered this enchanting. We didn't know there was anywhere to eat. First of all, I needed a pee. So you ended up wandering into a leisure center, which gives you an idea of what a weird swimming pool is like on the outskirts of Florence. Okay. Which is just kind of anthropologically interesting. And then we discovered this fantastic little cafe. And it was just enchanting. The woman running it was fantastic. Every single customer was local. They did actually amazing smoothies. And we intended just to have a smoothie, and we ended up staying there for lunch because, again, the car was charging. So what the hell? And so building in that degree of kind of noise is really, really important, I think. And, it is just, they're
surprise. I think I'm reading George Gilder. Gilder. He is brilliant. I'm reading his latest book now, like A Life After Capitalism. And I read the other one, The Knowledge is Power. Wealth. I was something. Well, the great, his kind of great inspiration is the information theory, and that basically information is surprise.
So you actually catch me in a very good place. So I'm actually down in Deal on the Kent coast. Okay. And I jokingly said the reason I decided to buy a flat in Deal was because it was the 15th best beach resort in Britain. Okay. It's got a pebble beach. Okay. Not a sandy beach. It's not as good as Cornwall for beaches or seaside. But on the other hand, if we're not careful, okay, we neglect other variables. There are two huge virtues to the East Kent coast. One, because it's quite populous. The population of Kent is 1.8 million. The towns, weirdly, and because the coastline is quite long, okay, because it's a very big county by British standards. The seaside resorts in Kent generally, with a few exceptions, aren't that crowded in the summer, but equally, because they're quite populous, they're not dead in the winter. So you can go there all year round. Now, if you go to Cornwall in the winter, everything's shut, okay? Secondly, and hardly irrelevantly, right, it's about 70 miles from London rather than, 270. Which means I can come down here for a week. And if there's a meeting on Wednesday in London that I can't move, I can take the train in and out and go to the meeting, which doesn't prevent me coming down here for a week. Now, you can't really do that from Cornwall. You can't do that from Scotland. You can't, you can't do it from Devon. You can't do it from Dorset very easily, but just about from Dorset, okay? But I can drive home in an hour and 20. So on occasions, my wife and I have come here for the day, even though we own a flat here, okay? And so one of the interesting things is that what tends to happen is that people think, what's the best beach resort? Qua beach resort. But other rather important factors like accessibility and so on, and, year-round entertainment. In other words, they're so keen and optimal. Now, it is undoubtedly true that if you're in Salcombe, if you own a house worth £1 million, if it's August, if you're down there with your kids, okay, for that week, you will have a fantastic time, although too fucking crowded, but theoretically, you would have a fantastic time. Okay? Actually, you don't, because a friend of mine pointed out, he said, there are loads of restaurants, but you have to book in March. Now, my idea of a holiday does not involve, okay, going and on Wednesday lunchtime, we're booked into Stein's restaurant because I want to get up in the morning and go, I don't feel like going to a restaurant. I want a kebab delivered to my, because that's the kind of mood I'm in, right? I don't want to actually have my entire week back down to my restaurant availability.
Yeah.
So actually, the Satisficer isn't really compromising. What it is they're actually effectively, how would I describe it? They're calibrating for a greater range of variables. They're basically accounting for a greater range of variables rather than just, what's the best place in,
The best is also dependent on how you weight the variables, right? Like you put something more important than the other. Like Jordan Peterson says that everything is a hierarchy. Like you always, like even if you select like you say, it's an unbiased measure, but it's always because it measures something, So it's always biased.
What you choose to measure first, what you choose to optimize first, distorts your subsequent thinking. Now, it's a pebble beach, right? It's not as good as a sandy beach, but on the other hand, because it's a pebble beach, it's not very crowded. And if you buy a pair of beach shoes, a pebble beach isn't actually much of a problem, to be honest. Okay. You can solve for those things. And so it is interesting in that, and probably we have to admit, of course, journalism plays a slight role in this, which is problematic because travel journalists, it's an adjunct form of prostitution, okay, which is you're invited to try the new 5-star hotel, but it is extremely much expected that you write very nicely about it. Now, I forgive these guys, right? If I'm invited to go to a 5-star hotel in San Sebastian, or on the same weekend I could check out a holiday park in Skegness, okay, I'm going to go to San Sebastian. I don't blame them, okay? You go to the most exotic holiday you're offered, but as a result, travel journalism has become completely dominated by the sort of brand new 5-star, absolutely perfect resort. Which is, in the same way that household decoration has become distorted by, decor magazines. Okay. It's set a level of kind of domestic perfection, which is actually inimical to quality of everyday life. If your house becomes a show home, you've kind of lost in a way,
Yeah.
And I remember noticing this. This is a bit of a curse of, this is a bit of a kind of tangent. But I assume you're in your garden in Argentina, and I assume in your apartment or house or wherever it is you're renting, there's a bit of peeling paint and there's a little bit of flaking this and there's a tap that's slightly wonky. Okay, is that fair?
Oh, in Argentina, everything is slightly like wonky, like.
That is totally a bad thing. And let me explain it, okay? My wife and I nearly bought or looked at buying this absolutely immaculate, minimalist, highly modern converted telephone exchange in Kent, which had been converted into a kind of minimalist white cube, basically. Okay. And it was sort of fantastic, except the people, when we went to look around, the people had kids. Okay. And the kids, as kids do, were like drawing their height on the wall with pencil. And there were a few places the kids had drawn little pin men on the wall. Okay. It looked like a travesty. Okay. You have this minimalist place where if your copy of House and Garden wasn't at right angles to the edge of the table, the place looked crap. Okay. And I suddenly realized, actually, this is a form of architectural aesthetic fascism. And actually, what you should go and buy is a Victorian house or a Tudor house or a Georgian house, even, okay. If you buy a very modern house, it looks great when it's perfect and shit. If you've just got 3 laptops and a load of cables left lying around on the table, the whole effect is ruined. And it's no coincidence that these people like Le Corbusier were often fascists, because effectively the theory was more important than the practical reality. The adherence to theory was more important than success in practical reality.
Oh, I recommend you this. Maybe that there is this book about how to design. How is it called? It's about the buildings of like how. Give me a second. It's called the Timeless Way of Building by Christopher Alexander. Do you know it? It's a beautiful.
I've never read it.
Oh, I really recommend it. It's about I think it's more like read in chapters or like audiobook. I have the audiobook and it's about like describing the quality that doesn't have a name. Basically, he's trying to paint a picture of like what is this quality of comfortable house or comfortable, where you feel comfortable like living. And he compares that it has like living features basically. And I think the modern, going back to like the modern art and design, it's very like sterile. So it doesn't have the biological sort of like, here grew a tree.
Fractal. Now, just to give an example, when we went to the kitchen of an Elizabethan house, which we also didn't buy, there was a kind of weird alcove in the kitchen, which I think had previously been an oven in the 18th century. And they popped a microwave in there. Okay. You had this kind of 18th century oven, there was a microwave inside it. That's how, and there were piles of old magazines lying around. Okay. And if the kids had drawn on the wall, it would have added to the place. It wouldn't have subtracted from it. And I remember thinking that this kind of quest for kind of anally retentive perfection is also, I think, really, really unwholesome, because actually, if you go to these very famous hotels, they're all the same fundamentally.
Because it's top down, right? So I think the fundamental forces, like tying it to something like even in marketing in general, is that I also stumbled upon the Dave Snowden, the Cinefin, and the simple, complex, complicated. And it's about this like emergent way of thinking about the world of like the top down, like the communist of like, we want our like fashion, you want to control like everything, and top down of like.
The book to read about that, but I often talk about in my podcast, James C. Scott's Seeing Like a State, which is the need to order as perceived from the top, effectively as imposed on people at the bottom, in a way that is completely injurious to what you might call local tacit application of intelligence and judgment. So it's more important that the people at the top can make sense of how the world works than that the world actually works, if you see what I mean.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Quest for Questions podcast. If your immediate reaction after listening to this episode is either, fuck, that's some great advice, can't wait for more, where do I sign up? Or, man, I had the same idea in mind, but I assumed it's just me being weird. Thank you for sharing. Or, this bastard hurt my feelings, offended my delicate soul, and should be banned from the internet. Then it means we're on the right track, doing God's work. In that case, make sure to subscribe, review, or do whatever else is allowed by technology to support this show. If you want to suggest a quest or have a question worthy of a quest, head to ConradYerba.com. Go down the rabbit hole of truth each and every Sunday. Available on most podcasting platforms, YouTube, and Pirate Bay. Wink, wink. Let Yerba be with you.